Welcome once again to the series we have here where we try to train ourselves on how to use Azure. And today we are back to our study. And today we're going to look at a topic which is referred to as designing solution to log and monitor Azure resource. So I say welcome once again wherever you're calling from. Wherever you're calling from. And I hope we have a very good journey this afternoon. And as we look at this topic. Now, before we go further, I'd like to give a brief introduction of myself. My name is Oluwaseyi Oluwawunmiju. I am one of Microsoft MVP. I'm also a consultant across multiple products like M365 and Azure with AI. I'm also a certified trainer. And today we are looking at this topic, designing Azure, especially looking at the logging and monitoring aspect. Now we're going to look at it in different dimension. We're going to look at how to monitor it from the data source. What are the data source that is required that Azure has provision for us to be able to use? How do we design what we call as a boundary, an environment, um, a place where we have our data married with the metrics, married with the ability to convert it into analysis. And that is a log analysis. What do I do with my log? Then we're going to look at other way by which we can get proper um, output in terms of insight by using dashboards and so many fancy things to make our analysis very, very represented in terms of getting it to our understanding. Then finally, we're going to look at what is referred to as Data Explorer. But before then, I like to tell you a story, and that story is actually my own means of representing the solution, and that is my own case case study. Now, in my earlier days in trying to build myself in the IT space, I work with a consulting firm, and the use case here is that the consulting firm was given the uh, the responsibility to build an exchange mailing system. Then I think it was exchange 23 to exchange 2010, I guess. Yeah. And that particular feature on the exchange, the bank required it to be able to be launched at certain time. Now we have done all our dots, done all what we need to do, and we're about to launch this particular exchange server. But at the peak of the day where we're going to launch and the bank executive were ready to start getting email, we noticed something that was remarkable. That was remarkable was that people could not get their mail. And as long as they could not get their mail, all what we have done for the past 4 months was just like a playbook. Now start diagnosing. Then I worked with a very senior consultant then. He was, I think, primarily the only MVP in Africa then, or second then. And I work in his consulting firm. And the question he asked me is that, have I gone to the event view? Now, primarily for us, most time when we are engineers, we actually look at ways by which we can deploy, but we don't really consider that there is always a mechanism to give us a feedback. And most servers, especially from earlier days like server 23, server 20, 2008, etc., there's an inbuilt which is built into the event view that can actually give you detailing of what is happening, especially for your system log, from your application that you are running on those server, and they can give you an inference that can help you to solve. Now, what was the problem? The problem was that from the network division of the bank has not opened a port, and that was then port 2223, port 23. Port 25, which is for exchange. It was not open, and because of that, the traffic of email could not go out. And how did he know? He just went to the event log, he opened the event log, and went to the diagnosis of the log file and saw from the event log and the error that was springing out from the server that the problem was actually a port on the network. And that took me almost a whole day, because I could not appreciate what is called feedback. Now, with the advent of the cloud technology, a lot of things has been put in place in order to mitigate such experience I had in my early days, especially when it comes to deploying and trying to look at high level server and high level peak application. Another instance will happen to me, although this one we are more advanced, more learned in terms of the IT, and our years of experience has increased. That a particular bank was having some issue. What was the issue of the bank? The bank has an application that run across the whole nation. Now, those applications actually reside on the mobile application, on the mobile apps. And most mobile apps need to download those applications and run it for their banking processes. But they noticed that certain category of region in Nigeria were not using this particular application. They were not banking with them, despite the fact they have an account with the bank. What was the problem? We were caught in, and we now deploy what we call a app insight with the log analysis. And with that, we push that to Power BI, and we're able to deduce from the dashboard that the problem they were having was actually because there's certain application, especially in the days where we are using Android. Then I think it was Android 5.0, and we have iOS still there, and we still have Microsoft Mobile. And these guys in the northern side were using what we call a BlackBerry, which was late version, very, very late version of BlackBerry. And that was we were able to resolve that for the bank because we could use as the monitoring tool they have. So I want you to sit tight and let's explore you can see what I have experienced myself when it comes to the issue of monitoring vis-a-vis feedback, vis-a-vis insight in my early days of bigging up myself in the IT industry. Now let's look at what Azure have for us. Now we're going to look at various points at which we can look at this Azure monitoring capability. Now, when you talk of monitoring capability, that's something that runs across our mind. One, analyzing what we have, the data we have that can easily give us an inference of decision. Two, how do I get to know what is happening? How do I set myself before any eventuality that is coming via my application, that is the alerting system? And how do I ensure that when it's going to an external component, I can easily use the prevailing monitoring system to get the solution? Now you can see from this diagram, we have two major points at which Azure build its infrastructure when it comes to the monitoring sequence. One is a metrics, the other one is a log. One is a metrics, the other one is a log. Now, the metrics is where we get insights, where we are able to understand from the diagnosis that comes from the data that have been fished out, just like a fisherman. You know, a fisherman, when he goes to the ocean, he throws his nets. And once he throws his net, specifically is when he get and draw out the fish from the ocean, that begin to diagnose and distinguish the kind of aquatic animal he wants to go take home, whether it's the crab, whether it's the tilapia fish, whether it's any fish you want. So each of these metrics help us to look at various components from the insight you get, from the visualization you can get from components like Power BI or from the Microsoft workbook, or from the analysis that this gives you about the inference that is coming from the data extracted from the log file that's coming from the server, especially from the Azure or the application. Now, run across insight, visualization, analysis, the response you are getting, especially to be able to be above, to be ready in terms of anything that is coming. And it can also be integrated to serverless solution like logic apps. Now, let's now look at the source of this data. Azure monitoring is built on several components that you can extract the data and the logs from. One is the application you are running on Azure. Two, if you are running a specific operating system on the virtual machine, or probably if you have an IaaS, which is you have your infrastructure that is being housed for you, it has been provisioned for you from Microsoft for your establishment. Two, you look at the Azure resource we are using, from the resource component, from your subscription component, from your tenant, which is the Azure tenant. And sometimes there are some custom solution that you have built that can help you to be able to get insight. So these are just the data source that we can get Azure from. Now, after we have seen how this data is being collected, collated, and how we can actually build analysis to the Azure monitoring, now the other thing we need to look at is how do we automatically get these sources, and how do we have access to it, and what method can we use? Now, data can be classified into different tiers. Now, the data tier actually form from the application level of Azure, the application you are running on it. Then from the lower tier, you have the Azure platform component, maybe the activity that is running on it. Then we can also look at it from the accessibility of those data. For example, if your access to a particular virtual machine is usually to an agent, maybe a log, any agent that you have installed on those server, you can collate data as a source, an identify as a source for accessibility. Then you can also extract it from any external system that is plugged into your environment in order to extract the data, extract the information, and ensure you pilot those information to better analysis and better insights. Now, let's now look at example. An example is when you go to the monitoring, there is a particular place called the metrics. Now, from the metrics, you can have things piled into it for diagnosis, things that are running from the operating system, where you can get data like the agent you install on each of your company if you are using an hybrid environment, or if there's a dependency agent that need to bring, especially from your virtual machine, you can actually get insight from your virtual machine and use that as a data source. You can also have it from your subscription, from the tenant, and even from your directory. Now, Active Directory is where you have your identity, and you can monitor the log file, especially if you want to have auditing. You want to be able to have information about the archive that you have on your storage, maybe the storage account, etc. All these are ways by which you can have access to those data, and you can be able to look at it. Now, from what I'm saying here, the basic fact here is that the monitoring tool that Azure has put in place in its cloud environment has been able to build over the years to be able to actualize analysis, to be able to build in insight, to be able to ensure that you have a better way by which you can diagnose any information, any abnormality that eventually erupt in your environment. Now, one other ways you can look at it, it's the design for logic analytics, log analytics. Now, what is log analytics? Now, Several people have defined it in several um, spectrum, but in my own view, log analytics is a particular measure by which Azure has introduced to build an environment, whether an environment to determine via your geographical location, via the source of the data, and each of these information are piled up to be able to give you an inference that can easily be used for your expert diagnosis or expert decision. So log analytics is a service which, from what you can see from the definition here, is to collate and analyze data. Now, how does the data come? That means what we are referring here is that for every analysis to happen, there must be a data source. And those data source can easily be put in a location. And that location is the environment refers as a workspace. Now, log analysis help you to even organize those data, especially when you are running every duty database, and you want to look at querying, you want to look at way to synchronize those data. It helps you to organize it in tables, and each of these table has its property that easily be queried. Now, as I said earlier on, most of this log analytics allow you to scope in which you want to determine the way the data output. You want to determine the extract you want to get from your data. In designing it, you must now be able to address certain criteria. One, the location which the data is stored. Two, you must be able to determine who have access to who, which user have access to it. Is it an isolated case of data? Is it a case by which you can design it according to the strategy you are looking at, especially, for example, for the bank I was talking earlier, they had an issue with an app they deploy, especially their mobile app, and they noticed that this mobile app is not performing well for certain application programs that runs on certain phones. Now, in order to be able to be specific, to get the log, they'll be specific and they throw the analysis against certain mobile phone application. That means if I'm going to get an analysis from the log files that come from those servers, I must be specific and strategic that what I am fishing out for are things that are related to one, to the mobile application, the platform. Two, to the operating system running on those mobile applications. So that also helped me to be strategically understanding what I want to provide and what I want to get from the analytics. So while we have done that, let's now move a little bit and look at control. Now, everything about IT, especially when it comes to the new era of the cloud-enabled environment, we must look at the aspect of how do we gain access, because statistically, in the past, it was noticed that the entrance door, the front door has been a way by which most security breach has come in, and that is through your identity, what you are bringing in, how you are having access to certain application. So Microsoft also build its monitoring system and a logging platform to be able to identify in certain 3 dimensions, which is called 3 deployment model. The first model is to ensure that we have a central point. Now, a central point of, for example, I use the family setting. There's certain family setting which even when they are extended have been built on a communal way of existence. Now, in those family settings, you notice that when they want to eat, they have a central bowl, and everybody that comes to the table get from that central bowl. And some that are very primitive, they all eat through that certain bowl. That means everything that is coming is central. Everything that is being administered by the father or the mother is done on that particular central bowl by which everybody have access. So when you have such environment, you'll be able to monitor your activity of your platform. How people have access to it is through the central point. And most time it gives you an advantage that you can easily control from one point. So the point of failure, despite is singular, but is able to be, you can easily diagnose across all your platform, from the system log, from the event that is coming to your system, to your server, to your VM, to your application, to the insight, are all coming. All the data are centralized. The second one is decentralized. Now this is because you have streamlined probably your environment to certain teams, certain application or project segments. So each of the spectrum has its own group, and each of these group have its own resource group, and each of them is managed by different team, and each of them manage their own log, and they can easily generate their resources and ensure they can get analysis. However, it might not be very comprehensive, because you have different silos, and each of these silos need to have their own individual. So if you are going to have a collective, in terms of monitoring and having a complex monitoring, you need to have an exclusive understanding of each segment of your application or your server or your log file that is coming to your Azure tenant or to your subscription. You might not be able to have that kind when you have a decentralized environment. Now, the third one is a hybrid. Now, what is hybrid? Hybrid is bringing two different components. Now, hybrid has been spelled out in different way. When I talk of hybrid, I talk of bringing two ice cream together. I love saying that anywhere I'm presenting, bringing a vanilla and a strawberry and putting them. I love the taste of these two. So also an hybrid is bringing a centralized environment and a decentralized environment, and ensuring that you're having it because of security, especially when you want to capitalize on audits and you want to have a better organization of your environment when you have certain environment that is being built on certain criteria. Now, after looking at different model, now let's look at how we can gain access. Now, accessing your workspace and accessing your data can be done in two different ways. One, you can do that through your workspace, and you can do that through the resource. Maybe the resource group you belong to, the subscription you have, and also you can have that according to the scope, especially the data associated with your resource. Now, when you look at these two environments and look at the way the access is being created in terms of the model intended for the workspace, in the context of that, you have to be looking at a central administration. While in the context of resource group, because it's usually piled and targeted to a team, you have to use like an application team to be able to build it and be able to have access to that resource. Then in terms of the permission, for you to have a workspace context, you must have permission on the workspace. And for you to have access to resource context, you must have just a read access to be able to have access to the resource. Now, in terms of the scope of each of this workspace accessibility in context, then you must have, for the resource context, you must use an Azure resource. Then for workspace, it can be like a log analytics workspace. Now let's look at other myths. Now we have seen how we gather data. We have also looked at ways by which we pilot those data in terms of the accessing it, in terms of ways by which you can collect those data. We have also seen that there are requirements to control it. How do we control it? We have seen three models, which is the hybrid, the decentralization method, and also the centralization method. Now let's look at the aspect of feedback, the aspect of analysis, the aspect of insight. And we're going to look at it from two different design perspectives. One is from Microsoft Azure Workbook, and the other one from Azure Insights. Now, for Microsoft Azure Workbook, it's actually a way by which you can create a very, very high level reporting visualization within your portal. And this also gives you an advantage because it allows multiple data sources to be able to stream into it, and is very interactive. Now, most time, the transformation of those data can give you things that can tell to availability, tell to performance, tell to the usage, tell to the health of your environment, especially when you look at each of these components that undermine the build-up of your Azure provision. Now, one thing about the Azure Workbook is ability to combine data. Now, that means in its report sequence, it allows you to have components across each resources that is enabled. And that can also, one thing I know about visualization, insight, and especially coming from the context of Power BI, is that the more you have data, the richer you can analyze, the richer you can get inference, the richer you can diagnose. So with this kind of environment, you can have enrichment across all your environment. Now, let's look at Azure Insights. Now, the early days of Azure, you notice that each of the applications you build on Azure is targeted to have a capability to give you an inference of what is happening. Why was it necessary to have such critical provision in Azure? Now, let's look at down the lane and try to look at application development in the past. Now, application development in the past actually was void of performance. I remember most time in those days when application developers come on with application, they run those applications, they roll out those applications. Most time they get feedback when they start getting negative influence about what is happening. And once they get that, it takes them a longer time. That's why you have version 2.1, version 2.2, version 2.3, because there was no mechanism to give them a real-time update of the performance, especially the problem, or what is actually attacking the application and affecting users from using the application they have deployed. Over the years, Microsoft and various research environments have seen that is necessary to build a mechanism across each application, whether your application is running on your virtual machine or your computer or on your server, or probably you have something with the serverless environment and with the containerization of the container solution that we have out there. You must be able to have an insight to what is happening in your container, the application that is built about it, especially when you are running things like Kubernetes or the other one, if I remember its name, Kubernetes, and when I remember, I'll mention it. Once you are running such application, you should be able to manage and have a preview of the dynamics of the application, the efficiency and the performance of those applications, and to be sure in terms of the gap, especially when it comes to resources like memory, like storage. When is it going out? When is it not? When is the efficiency being met across your container environment. Also, even when you want to monitor your virtual machine are actually scalable. And as you are scaling it, you must be able to have an influence of the topology and understanding of what is happening. We know from what I have already said earlier that most applications require an insight to address and analyze and to be able to get the health factor of each application and get the heartbeats of those applications, especially when it comes to the usage from the user angle, and to be able to have a divergence of a circle that can bring about the application end to end, be able to have a innovation at any time when an insight come across it. So generally, Azure Insights was designed to build an environment of debugging, an environment to cover up for every performance issue, and to ensure that users are not usually become the end and they don't become the end they get affected at the end, because most time in the past, most application that is being run are actually the feedback from those that are using the application. It's what constitutes what the developer use to remodel the application. But if you have instant insight that is coming, you can easily diverge, understand, and remodernize your application with time. Now, let's look at how do we select our insight, especially when it comes to application. Now, for application insight, there are certain things that you cannot avoid. I mentioned your user. I mentioned the way the application is performing. I mentioned the way by which each user's experience the failure, because once you start have very long response time to certain application, the application insight will give you a diagram that constitute that activity, and you can easily know that there's an issue maybe for certain application, for certain mobile devices, or for certain desktop or web application. Then you must be able to understand that it gives you more of an insight to statistics. And those statistics come across from your server to the client and from the client to the server. And this also, one thing about application insight, once it gets those insights, it creates a snapshot. And that snapshot can be a very good means by which developer can trace and the engineers can trace what is really happening with the application and how they can solve it. So gradually, we are looking at other way by which we can actually have a monitoring mechanism. Now, we know we are in an era where we have a mixture of data which are structured, data which are unstructured, and we are in the euphoria of what is referred to for very, very data professional, which is referred as a big data. Now, the advantage of big data that it gives you a preference to be able to diagnose, have information across certain different data, across several data. And each of these influence gives you the ability to know what to do and how to go about it. Now, let's look at the design of Azure Data Explorer. Can this help us in the data sequence? So, what is Data Explorer? Now, Data Explorer is a means of monitoring that Microsoft have designed with Azure because of the high volume, the capacity of data, the scalability of data, and in order to have a fast way by which we can get information, analyze those information, and be able to diagnose what to do, you need such solution to be able to give you an exploration through the log and to the telemetry that is coming from the data. So what do I mean? In terms of streaming modernized solution and software and that collect heavyweight data and store those data, you need something like Azure Data Explorer. Azure Data Explorer help you to combine certain other applications that Microsoft has put out there, especially for visualization, called Sentinel, Azure Sentinel, and Azure Monitor capability in terms of monitoring those sequence of those data, ensuring those data are feedback and log file is collated and stored. Now, each of these now can help us to be able to have a better way to analyze every weight and every sequencing data that have high electricity. Now, what do I mean by that? Azure Sentinel with the Data Explorer, the combination gives a very, very good insight. Now, in terms of diagnosis, in terms of reporting, and in terms of using application for AI and machine learning, you need an explorer that can give you an insight when you are running such application. Now, we are seeing so many things happen with ChatGPT all over the world. Some people are trying to block the ChatGPT AI to get information from their database and the rest. You can see with the Azure Data Explorer built on that ChatGPT, you can easily, I don't know whether that is being implied or developed with it, but I have a mindset that that might be. And that means that data can easily be exploited and information can be gotten, and you can easily know where and what the scope, especially through the geography, to the location, and to the application that is getting data from. Data Explorer also, because of the ability to allow diverse data to come in, and it can have its resource from different sources, whether it's a website, whether it's IoT devices, whether it's any other devices there, it can actually build across each of the spectrum. So let's look at some case studies. While I think Tosi have said it there that if you have any question, you can drop it. If not, just send the question to the group, and we can actually find a way to solve it. Now, let's look at some case study. Now, there are several case studies that we can look at. Now, looking at what we have said today, we started with what Azure has in terms of monitoring. We look at other means by which you can have insight, analyze data, and have, after this data has been collated, we have what we call application insights. Then we talk about how we can bring this insight into very, very fine graphical dashboard that can easily tell. And we also look at a way by which you can have an environment, a location where data can be stored, analysis can be done, which is called the logic analytics. Now, each of these can be a scenario that you can actually look at and use for collating data and trying to get influence from it. Now, an example here is for this particular company called Fabricant, they have a project management solution. Now, in that project management solution, there are certain things that this solution is being used for. One, the third-party window application. They use this project management solution to run something like getting their SQL server. They have several images on their NAS that the project manager solution can help them to do. And they know that each of these solutions, they need to be able to build it in a way that it can allow people like the other users can share file from it and can internalize it, and the corporate users can also use it. So all these are actually built on by Fabricant. Now, how do we use the solution? Now, there are several ways by which this can be stored. You can use Azure Blob, you can use Azure File to share the file. You can have it share it to your CLI mode by using Azure Copy. All this can be used to store it, and each of the solution can be run on storage. And from that storage, you can trigger things like alert to know when the storage is full. You can trigger things that could give you insight about how it's being used and how people are having access to it. Now, looking at that, we can see that there are also several other resources that we can use to look at it. Now, while we are at that, can we just, I'll share my screen now and quickly take us through um, a demo, and why I wait if there's any question, so that I will just bring out what I've been saying. Now, this is my Azure environment. We know how to get to Azure. You have to log in, and remember, before you can log in, you must have your subscription handy, and your subscription must be able to give you access, because without that, you might not be able to have access to the server, and that is very, very essential in order to have access to the environment. So here, now I'll quickly go and just give us an overview of the monitoring environment in Azure. Now, the monitoring environment comprises of various activity. Now, it starts with an overview. An overview gives us several other things you can look at it. Now, I mentioned application insight. There are other insights you can get also from your VM, from your container, from your network. You can actually have insight from your network. For those that are the network space and they want to use Azure monitoring, it can help you to check. Then you can also get and detect things in order to have you their capability to diagnose and to trigger alerts, to be able to give you awareness on what is happening. Now, here you can also see the metrics, the alert, the log, the workbook, and change analysis for those that want to have their change analysis done across the environment. Now another thing we need to look at, especially from Azure, is the activity log. Now, the activity log help you to look at each of the activity that runs within your application. And that comprises of your system alerts, your system application, what is happening in your environment, and how those things has been drilled down into your operation. Now you can see the alert system where you can compose the alert and ensure that you trigger. Okay, fail to provide stamp. Okay, don't worry. Now, this is where you can create alerts. And what the essence of creating alert is to try to trigger a way by which you ensure that your environment has the capability and the ability to be able to run analysis within the spectrum and the scope of your application. Then we have the metrics. The metrics, which is where you can get the scope of your resource. You can see there are different scope you can run through, whether it's through your database, whether you want to run through your key vault, especially for your security keys, whether you want to run through your virtual machine, and across applications like the configuration of your application, across your directory system, your AD, Azure AD. You can actually run all this through the scope, and each scope you make will help you to analyze what is happening. Now, this is the recent application that's been run. If something is wrong, so we'll get to that later. Then we have the log file. This is where specifically Microsoft has reorganized this. Now you have different query. Now they have done it in a way that you can, you use what we call the query, the query code. Now each of these query code has been organized in sequence where you can run to analyze your environment and get those information, whether it's the MFA, it gives you can run to AWS environment, you can run through it to other environment that is not even Microsoft. If you want to analyze your network and you want to query it, you can also run that via this query pack. Okay. Now let's do a quick one. Now, in order to have an analysis, let's quickly look at creating a storage account. So let's quickly create a storage account. You go to your resource, and storage account. Then I create one. So I'm going to create a storage account and use that storage account. Something storage. Sorry for that. I think my subscription is just acting up. Let me be sure that I am. Damn it. And take that from storage account. Okay. Now I want to create a new storage account. Let's assume I'm trying to get myself up in terms of my storage, and I want to analyze it and ensure that I have information about storage account. Let me create one called let's call it Azure. Sorry, you can't use capital. I'm just used with that. Azure, I don't know whether you are like me. I always want to put capital in front of every study group demo. Now I leave at the default. Um, then I leave it as standard, make it redundant storage. Then I look at it, I review it, I create one, it validate it. Once it's passed the validation, I create the storage. Now I create the storage account. Now, once I've created the storage account, the next thing is for me to try to ensure that I have certain information and certain things in my, like creating a blog inside. So it's still deploying, take a few minutes, deployment will be through. Then we can see what we have in the storage account called Azure Study Group demo. Okay, while that is going on, let me duplicate this. Let me go to the monitor. That duplicate has caused a while. Hope it's working. Okay, all right, it's failed. So let me try and delete this. So, I did it while I was trying to. Okay, let me just quickly create another one. Sorry for that. Storage. I wanted to have a duplicate of the environment and keep on talking without. This is serious. Let me check my subscription. I think there's an issue with my subscription. Sorry. Let me just refresh my subscription. Let me try it again. Refresh it. Azure Study demo 1. Let it work now. So once we have that, we now create a container within the storage account. Then from the container, we upload some data. Then we now go back to the monitoring and see how those data is being fetched from the data from the monitoring tool of Azure and how we can get insight from that. Okay, it's almost done. Sorry for delay. Sorry for the delay. Almost done. Okay, good. Let me pin it to my dashboard. Pin it. Then go to the resource. Now, this is my storage account now. I'll just go right at the storage, data storage, create a container. Not to waste time, create a new one. You can call it Azure Study 1 Monitor app. So much. So let it be privately. Let's just leave it at default, create it just because of our time. Now, once we have a storage called Azure Study, let's log into that storage and try to upload some document. I browse through my file here. Let me just see some files that I can put up there. Okay, let me put this, put this, put this, put this, put as many files there. Let's put some PDF. Let's put some PDF there. Okay, let's just put this one. Then we upload it. Now, once it shows green, it means it's successful. We can even open it in order to cause activity on it. We can download it to ensure that we are doing an activity there. So once we have done that, let's close this. Now, the next thing we need to go to is to try and look at the monitoring. Now you can access it when you go right down. You see monitoring as where we have the insight, the alert, the workbook, the diagnostic setting. Now each of them is a way by which you can send data, especially when you are going to create a log analytics very soon. Now you see the insight. You can actually the diagnostic setting is way by which you can create by default, he has already given us everything about Azure demo, the storage account that is there, and you can actually go to the monitoring. Now let's just go to the monitoring and see it from the home monitor. Now let's look at from the activity log. Now you see it's specific now, showing us everything that was successful when we create that account and the key that was created. And you can actually change this if you want, or if you want to change the timestamp, the last for 1 hour. You can also filter it by adding filtering. You can change the severity, whether you want error, warning, or critical within the specimen of this particular storage account. So this will now give you an insight through the activity. Now, let's now look at, once we have that in the monitoring, we can actually get more insight from here by looking at the metrics. Now, when you get to the metrics section, the metric will ask you to scope what you want to have, what you want to see here. Now, for me, maybe I want to see everything about this, my Azure Study. Now, I apply it. Then it tries to ask me, what are the criteria in terms of the metrics I want to look for in it? Let me just do an ingress of the data that came in, and it is sum it up. Then you can even add some other things because it comes with several drilling components. Now, if I want to drill it more, I want to put a bar chart. So I want you to give me a chart of what is happening with the data, when the data was done, and how the percentage is coming up gradually. You can see how it's summing up all those things. Then you can add more metrics. You can also look at things like availability of the data. And you can see I have 2 now. I can also try to change it. Maybe I don't want a bar chart. I want something like area chart. It change it to an area chart for me. Or I want to drill it down to something like a scatter chart. It scatter the chart for me. I can easily have a way by which I can examine and get the information, especially analyze the way this data is being drilled in terms of the log. So the more I have activity in my storage account, the more the data is being filed up and the storage is being, you can also give me the transaction that is happening, the size, the latency of when it was uploaded. And this can also be taken to my workbook where I can actually have, but this workbook is very fine when you have streamline of several data from different sources. And that can give you a very good outlook on that. Let's go back to the monitor. And is there any question from the not checked? If not, is there any question? Okay. So you can also see here. Now let's now look at how do we look at log analysis. Now, log analysis is a space where you have all your data, all the information that you need, and all the resources you need to digest, help you to analyze those data, and you can now influence it into a particular dashboard, whether Power BI or any other dashboard, whether it's a workbook, etc. Now, let's see how do we create a log space. Now, let's go back to the home and try to add. Let's just type analytic workspace. It takes you to the marketplace. Then you create one. Now, as usual, Microsoft will try to search for your subscription whether you have the right, whether you have the access to do that. So we put the workbook as learn. Then what name do we want to give it? Let's call it the Azure Study. Log is it. Now let's just leave it as the default region. Then you click and you notice that it automatically gives you a price bar of pay as you go. Pay as you go. So once you have that, let's just create it. Take some few minutes. Take some few minutes. Okay, Caleb, you are asking as a beginner, how do you get started with Azure environment? Now, Caleb, that's why I don't know, am I too fast today? I know we are in the midst of our audience. So I think what you need to do now is to try to lay hand on what we call Azure Fundamental. You go to what we call Microsoft LAN, and go through Azure Fundamental. It gives you all the necessary information you need to start up as a beginner. Now, the beauty of Azure is that it's a pointer to Microsoft Cloud environment. In the cloud first environment that we have everywhere now, you need to be able to master your skill on that. So you can go through that and be able to engage yourself with what you have there and build your knowledge. So now we are in the log analysis area. You can see we have the overview, which will give you the same thing that you have, the access control, where you can categorize how you want to have access, how people can view it, which is very necessary in terms of control. Then when you go down to the setting, you can see the table where all those information will be. Now you see, you can create your own table, but apparently it has created table for us, especially from the block storage we have uploaded and we created earlier. You can see he has set up the alerts. Those are the table created, the app center error, computer group in terms of group, the insight metrics that come from the application or from the the um the storage that is there, or any application you have there, the operation that is there. It helps you to categorize each of them, and you can do that. This is very good for the data analysis. Then the usage and the estimate in terms of cost, it also gives you a preview of how much it will cost per. You can see now for each price you have for log data injection, we have $2.99, and it's also lasts for 30 days. Then you have for Defender, for you getting analysis on your security platform and what you need to do. It just it's not going to cost you any. Then if you are going to get retention of data, then you need to pay like a 13 cents on Microsoft Azure. Then you can also scale up in terms of changing your tier by looking at different sizes that you want. Now, pay as go is like a 0 size, but the rest you can categorize into the size of the data you want to try to analyze. Then when you scroll down, monitoring, this is where you get insights. It builds your insight for the data in terms of the injection of the volume, the time, and you can see here that we have not created anything in order to have the data to be analyzed. Then in terms of diagnosis setting, now under diagnosis setting, you can actually add certain, because we know for every log analytic space, we need to send data. Now, I need to now customize this my environment to be able to have an injection of data to be able to analyze. Now, you go to your add your diagnosis setting. Under your add your diagnosis setting, it gives you several components by which you can actually get data from, especially from the Azure Monitor. You can get it from your log, which can be used for audit and for any log, whether it's system activity or the event activity on your environment, or on your, if you are using hybrid and you want to get event activity from the server that is being that you have as an hybrid with Azure, then you can have audit component, you can have it as also metrics. So for me, I need to first of all title this Azure Study Monitoring Log AZ. Now I've already titled it. What do I want to? I want my log, or I just want all log. I also want the metrics. Now, where do I want to send this information to? I want to send it to my, remember, we created this study, this Azure Study log analysis at the Western US region. So once I've sent that, what I'm trying to say, all the diagnoses that come from all the log, I'm sending it to this workspace for analysis. Once I have that, I save it. Takes some few couple of minutes. We start pulling those information, and that data is updated. Now let's go back to the overview again. Now go to the resource. Let's see the metrics now. I think you should be able to gather some information for us. Activity log, you start piling up those information. The workspace we created, you still pulling out the rules, getting those information out. Overview, all the information connected to the log. So let's go to the metrics. Let's see what is trying to gather. Okay, it starts gathering information. Now, this is the analysis. This is the standard. What am I looking for here? Maybe because I actually uploaded some file. Let's look at free space. I think I choose free space. The average free space from our data. Let's do the maximum. Let's see how long it's going to get us there. It's still scoping it. Let's add another metrics. Let's look at what other thing can we get from data. Okay, use space, use that time, and let's add another. We can add as many metrics you want, just to gather information to keep our data intact and analyze those data that is coming from what we uploaded. Let's look at nice time, processor use use time available. Okay, let's add available bytes. Let's add that. So it's still pulling out, and that is it. So I'll go back to our slide. I'll minimize this. Now that there are other things you can get, other information you can get from Microsoft LAN. Just try to go to doc.microsoft.com/LAN. Then you can look at how you can analyze infrastructure using Microsoft monitoring log, the performance you can get from monitoring log and the likes. And I think that is it from me. Please, if you have any question, you can just drop it. We have some few minutes to talk. Okay, Tosin, are you there? Or Joseph? So in the outset of if there's no other question, um So in the absence of none, please stay tuned next week. We are going to bring to your way also some other activity that uh, um, that we will bring your way next week in the Azure series. Thank you and stay blessed. Okay. Those who want to come up, okay. Thank you all. Have a blessed weekend.